For 60 years, African football has been told the same story. Great passion, great players, but never quite good enough when it matters most. The 2026 World Cup ended that story permanently. This is the moment African football stopped being a promise and became a fact. Chapter 1. The numbers that changed everything. At the 2026 World Cup, African nations collectively performed better than at any point in the history of the tournament. Morocco reached the semi-finals for the second consecutive World Cup, the first African nation ever to achieve that feat. Senegal advanced to the quarter-finals, led by a generation of technically complete midfielders who played with a discipline that neutralized teams worth 10 times their football infrastructure budget. Nigeria reached the last 8 for the first time in their history, driven by players who grew up in elite European academies without losing their African identity. The collective statistics told the same story. African teams in 2026 recorded higher average pressing intensity than the European average. Their ball retention in the final third improved by 30% compared to 2022. Their tactical shape, flexible, aggressive, and technically fluent, represented a complete break from the reactive football African teams had historically been forced to play on the world stage. Chapter 2. What changed behind the scenes? The on-pitch performance was the visible result. The invisible cause was what happened in African football development over the previous decade. The Confederation of African Football restructured its youth development programs in 2016. By 2026, an entire generation of players had been developed under that new system, technically superior, tactically flexible, and physically prepared for the demands of elite international football. Simultaneously, several African nations rebuilt their coaching philosophy around a single principle: respect African playing culture instead of replacing it with a European template. The result was teams that played like themselves, fast, expressive, technically sharp, and tactically intelligent, rather than a pale imitation of systems built for someone else's game. Chapter 3. What comes next? The 2026 World Cup did not just give Africa great memories. It gave African football a proven blueprint. The countries that performed best were those that invested earliest in youth infrastructure. The pipeline is now full. Players developing under these systems right now will reach their peak at the 2030 and 2034 World Cups. The question is no longer whether African football belongs at the highest level. The 2026 World Cup answered that permanently. The question now is which African nation becomes the first to win the World Cup, and whether the rest of the world is ready for what that era of football will look like. Africa's rise is not a story about potential anymore. The 2026 World Cup made it a story about arrival. Subscribe to Info Vibe Hub, where every story goes deeper than the headline.